If I'm taking notes and reporting, I guess I'd rather have somebody else actually run us through the paces of these questions and lead that conversation. Do we have any one that would like to do that?
May I nominate either one of the commissioners, because that
There
way
you
they
go.
would lead us through this. And then, of course, it answers their questions or their concerns.
Well, I'll go ahead and let Ken do that. I'll be leaving at 11:30 anyhow. So that wouldn't be fair if I did it and had to leave.
Take it away, Ken. You're muted.
All right. I was going to defer to the Vice Mayor, but thank you, Vice Mayor Hyde. So success. In terms of social justice, how are we going to be defining success? The first question is 3 years time, but let's start with like what can we accomplish in 1 year's time, and then what are we looking to 3 years time in terms of success, and what's social justice mean to all of us? I mean, we might have different views of what that even entails in social equity, and so like, how are we going to be able to how can we define success for social justice in a 1 year and a 3 year time frame? Yes, Jake.
So like, first of all, I think it's important that, and I did notice that on the second printout of the different committees, they did differentiate between social justice and equity. And those are both on the conversation for now. But starting with social justice, I think defining the difference between those two concepts is important. And so with success in 1 year's time, I think really gaining widespread community understanding of what social justice is in a contemporary standpoint would be a really big progressive goal, because, I think most people, if they really understood it, would agree with the tenets of social justice. But it's been so politicized, both not only in like the debate over public safety and their efficacy and effectiveness, but also, on the whole red blue, political grandstand going on. So getting folks to really look at it as a substantive concept and not as a political issue would be really important over the first year. And then I would say defining success in 3 years would be, as a result of that, starting to see an improvement of outcomes from folks who are currently marginalized and who really need to be the beneficiaries of social justice policies and social justice community goals. Get that, Dave? That was a long answer to a short question.
You guys just keep talking. I will sum this up. So
It's a very good note.
I would just like to piggyback on what Jake and Commissioner Johnson said. I think it is important to understand that, for everyone to understand exactly what social justice and social equity means, because there's different understandings of what that means, and I think it needs to be cleared up if it can be.
Does somebody have?
Well, I guess
I'm sorry.
when I think of social justice, I just think of fair treatment for everyone, and respect, for the rights of respect for rights, whether it's civil rights or just the rights of, that things are equitable across, demographics, whether it's, minorities or, and that there's nobody left behind. I don't know that there's a great way to say that, but I mean, we could probably look up just like a definition of it, but I guess I think of it as just fair treatment when I think of, equity.
So I don't want to, cannibalize the conversation, but, social justice is kind of contemporarily defined as, structural equity and equality and in the distribution of privileges and treatment under the law and culture in a society. So what that really means is, making sure that outcomes from a policy standpoint point, are not only equal and equitable in writing and intent, but in practice. So, good examples, and the examples that I mentioned that have been widely politicized are, law enforcement outcomes against different demographics, but also, less talked about from a social justice standpoint are, wage outcomes based on gender, wage outcomes based on, both ethnic and regional geographic lines. So there's all kinds of examples where social justice comes into play for marginalized communities. It's not just it's not only that conversation that's been widely distributed over the last year around policing. It's really meant to entail the actual practice of equity that beyond just the policies being written, because that's kind of the difference between equality and equity.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm just to kind of piggyback on that. It's about the inputs and the outputs. Not
That's
what we're
true.
just doing with policy, but how policy is affected, implemented, and benefiting of our community. So yeah, being mindful of most. So I'm sorry I lost y'all for a second. My internet
But
connection got
but
wonky.
also not creating policy that is not equitable, and being able to recognize when we have policy that is not equitable.
Yep.
Yep.
And the application of that policy in an equitable manner.
Right.
One thing I wonder, or that I toy with my head is the difference between trying to advance equity versus being equitable, because we know that inequity exists in our society, that it's not an even playing field, and it's been that way for years, decades, centuries.
Forever.
Yeah.
Since the onset.
And so like, if we start now and say, okay, we're going to be equitable in everything we do in terms of our policy and the implementation and application thereof, how is that helping to address the legacy of inequity? Because not everyone's starting at the same point. And so we don't necessarily want to freeze where we're at now. We want to address.
Well,
Go ahead,
to
Luana.
me, it kind of
Good
is
point,
like
Ian.
when we had that training, I think last year, with Alfredo, and he had a picture where there were, people looking at this one right here. That's the one where they're like looking at a game, and it's like, okay, well, if you look at equality, you can provide the same, you can provide the same for everyone, but equity is you provide what people need. And so I think that kind of sums it up right there.
I brought this photo up because that's what stood out to me the most, Joanna.
Yep.
It really resonated with me. And
Mhm.
I thought about 100 times since then, and actually went out and found the photo after that because just the visual right there, like, brought it home as to what this means.
Yep. That's the one right there. So there's one that shows equality. You give everybody the same thing, but that's not what necessarily everybody needs. And then you show equity, and if you look at it, it's just making sure everybody can see the game, but that could mean different things for each person. And so just recognizing that and being sensitive to that, and also working towards that at all times, and having that be the vision.
That's like a really great point. I think the photo also does a good job of kind of illustrating the difference that I was referencing between social equity and social justice. So,
Mhm.
social equity, the picture on the right where everybody has the appropriately sized box, and in this case, it would be, policy to help advance them to a point where they truly are having equal enjoyment of, the game, which in this case would be a life, like civil life. And then the equality side actually shows a really good example of, where social justice issues exist. So the social justice side of things means everybody under the letter of the law in that picture is supposed to be entitled to that box, right? Everybody's supposed to get a box. Now, whether or not that addresses the back end issues on the equity side, the social justice side is a front end issue saying that, okay, everybody's supposed to get the box, but not everybody's getting, not everybody who should be is getting their box. So what that can translate to is, policies that on paper treat everybody equally, but in practice and implementation cause inequities. So, again, I'll touch on the gender wage gap, an educational attainment despite under the law equal access. So that's a good illustrator of the difference between social justice and social equity. And I think, Luana touched on like making sure that we don't like promote or implement policies that create inequities. And then Ken asked a good question about, well, how do we address social equity issues and address previous inequities? And a euphemism I use a lot of the time regarding specifically inequity in the minority community in our society is it took a lot of special attention and treatment to create that inequity, and it's going to take a lot of special attention and treatment to level that playing field. So and what I mean by that is, everything as a basis of law, and then now as a basis of like social construct, has contributed to the marginalization of minority communities, especially Black Americans,
Mhm.
basically in the entire history of our country. Which means people are going to have to accept the fact that it's going to take special treatment in a positive way for those marginalized communities as a matter of policy in order to create that level playing field. You can't expect those people to do it on their own just because the letter of the law it now says everyone is equal. And so I think that's why, for that first year goal, I said for our community, it'd be good to just get people to understand these concepts, because where you see a lot of pushback is, that term that I really, really loathe is reverse discrimination. Well, affirmative action in college is reverse discrimination, or hiring people with a focus on diversity and inclusion is reverse discrimination against white people. Well, those are constructs where if people really understood these definitions and the historical context of them, they might be a lot more accepting of those types of policies and may hesitate to jump to those conclusions. So I think it's really important in the short term that we teach people these things.
So
Absolutely,
there's
so many great insights. Thank you, Jake, for sharing that. Yeah, definitely requires dedicated intentionality to resolve, because there was certainly a history of intentionality to create these systems of inequity that perpetuate. Does anyone else have anything to share about what is defining success or for advancing social equity or social justice in our city? And who needs to be at the table to provide that input, that support and collaboration so that we can truly tackle and advance and pursue that intentionality that Jake was just touching on and so eloquently highlighting?
I guess I'll just echo what's been said already before, but awareness for everyone on what these terms mean and how it all works out, I think is really important. I know when I was assigned to this group, I looked up some of the definitions again, because they're all terms I've been aware of and hear and have a vague general sense of what they mean, but specifically how each one plays out, I think is important. And the training we did as a city staff last year at some point, I thought was really crucial in helping understand some of that and bringing, at least making me more aware of some of that. And it might be good to continue some of that into the future so that we can stay up with what's going on and just be aware of it in general. And then we can easily, in our communication with the neighbors and citizens, communicate that with them.
Thank you. So to follow up or piggyback on that, just to look at the successes we might have been making just in the past year, because you talked about the training that was done last year, that was born out of, in part, our goal setting in 2019. And how have, based on the training that's been received and with cultural biases and whatnot, how have staff that received that training, how have you incorporated that into your recommendations or your policies or your day-to-day execution of your duties? How have they been baked in? How are they being incorporated?
Well, I can say that, Jeff might want to speak. I don't know if he's still on the line, but because I can't see him on my screen, but he might want to speak to what some things that the police department's doing. And I can probably speak to some things that DPW is starting to do. DPW just recently opened up a labor position that is like a 2-year position that it is basically a training position, because so many of the positions out there require you to have a CDLA. And then with the, the application and interview process, we were very intentional in terms of attempting to bring more minorities into the public works, because DPW actually is probably, of the numbers of people that I have out there, our demographic numbers are the lowest probably out there now. And I mean, they're frontline people that are out in the public all the time, so people see them. And then to like be in a community that's almost 40% minority, or we'll just say almost 40% African American, and then not see people that look like you. I mean, that's very disturbing. But I can let Jeff talk about, what he's doing in the police.
Duana, what is the number for that area in terms of our employee count?
I would have to look it up, but it's the lowest. I can say that it is the lowest of, I will get that number for you, but I don't have it readily available in front of me right now, but it is probably the lowest of our city departments in terms of, I mean, they have, and possibly because they have the most number of people, other than the public safety realm, but then they have very few minorities. But he has begun with the new director, he has begun to be more intentional about attempting to bring more minorities into the department and make some changes there. So
I think,
I wanna
well, for me, thinking about, are you thinking about office staff over there too, or just the people on the?
well, I mean, the office staff, we do have some diversity in the office staff. It's just the people that are out in the field.
Okay.
Up until, I would say the last time that I did our EEO4, we probably only had 2 African Americans,
That's what I can remember right now.
out in the field, and out of, a staff of over 60. And then I think we had 2 Hispanic, and then, maybe 1 other, like Pacific Islander. And then now he's just hired or made offers to 1 Hispanic and 1 African American for the new labor position. So out of three positions that were posted, he's getting 2 minorities. So 2/3 of that recruitment are going to be minorities.
I was really happy too. I saw when I knew it was very intentional to try to go for a minority group for that last hire, by taking away some of those qualifications that they could learn on the job, and then maybe take those testings
Right.
and stuff. And so I'm glad to see that that's
Well, and it's difficult to find people anyway, for those positions because they all require CDL. Many of them require CDLA. And so the intent is that they can train, in-house and help people to get that CDLA.
As an experienced person who drives a snowplow truck, I can tell you that it is not as easy as it looks to go through that.
And is a terrible plow truck driver.
I gotta see. So, don't park too close.
You should
She
see
will
her drive
run
a
over
drone.
everything in her path.
Duana, you should see her drive a drone.
That's right, that's right.
I wanna
Or what was the golf cart that had all the
Go ahead, Jake.
Well, yeah, I didn't know you drove any of those things, so we're gonna have to talk about that another time because I need more details. But I
purely
want to
PR, purely PR,
I would imagine
bad
not
PR.
I want to let Jeff talk about some of the good stuff his departments have been doing, but really quickly, I want to kind of point out that Duana tacitly kind of just gave a perfect example of a historical, like, social inequity. So historically speaking, like, tradesman positions have been dominated by Caucasian males because those have been so closely tied to other social constructs like unions, social clubs, trade schools, things like that, that at one time or another in our history have been racially and gender discriminatory. And so, the public safety side of things, because it's such an important and front facing, and, is universal, it's everywhere, have come up with some really good and innovative solutions. And historically, during segregation, that was already a commonplace thing where police officers in African American communities usually came from those communities. But the public works side of stuff, where it's technical skills that kind of have to be learned on the job. So those were never taught because we didn't let those folks on the job. And so, uh, I think already we're talking about, who needs to be at the table to provide input, support, and collaboration. And that kind of segues us well after Jeff says, some of the cool stuff his departments have been doing to move towards success on these things. But the fact that Leo and, Frank and everybody that was involved in that created those base level positions to get people's foot in the door without necessarily having those credentials that can be a barrier, really shows that we are taking initiative on social equity, because that's been, as somebody who is a city manager in a majority African American community and drawing on a population that was 78% African American, I still had a hard time finding, employees that represented the community they were serving, especially in public works. So I think that's a great example of how there is this historical social injustice and social inequity, and how you have to be very intentional and quite, I call it special treatment because that's what it is, and that's what people who are critical of it like to scream about. But you have to be intentional and deliberate in finding policies to level that playing field. So that's a great example of the city doing something well already. And with that, I defer to Jeff. I don't want to.
That's spot on, Jake. And I think that, it kind of connects with the MCEC program that we heard from Chauncey earlier, of trying to get youth in our community into the trades, building trades, to try to address some of that inequity and give those opportunities and their pathways to apprenticeship with them. And intersects with the youth component of our conversations today, the social equity component, and the housing, because hopefully they'll be building those houses that we're constructing here. But before we go to Chief Lewis, because I know Vice Mayor Hood has to be leaving here at 11:30, and so there's not much time left that we're going to have him. And so I just want to give him an opportunity if he wants, and particularly as the only African American man, on this panel here, give him the opportunity to speak what success means to him with regard to social justice. And I don't know if he already weighed in earlier because I got knocked off Zoom a couple of times, but I want to hear from Vice Mayor Hood about what success means to him.
You can go ahead, Chief Lewis.
Oh, okay. Well, as I listen to the group, that's where I probably learn the most. But I'm gonna tell you right now, like I said, I started my career in 1978, and the department I was at was very diverse back then. It's pretty amazing of what was going on there, why we had as many minorities as we had. It was because of a system that kind of like front and back loaded us a lot of minorities. But I look at that department today, that was Ypsilanti Police Department, they are suffering from the same thing we do. They don't have any minorities anymore. Where we used to be about 30 or 40%, now they're like 4%. But what happened I guess as current events went on, it changed that. But in today's market or whatever, it's a very complex issue to diversify your departments. And there's a lot of, we don't have enough time to talk about all the barriers that are out there, but I see them every day. There's a lot of barriers I run into. It's a complex issue. And one thing Dewana said, and this was a really important word, I wish I'd have used this earlier, is intentional. So I've learned, especially when I got into leadership, if you want to get something done, you have to be intentional. There's all kinds of excuses, there's all kinds of reasons, there's all kinds of barriers in the complexity of the issue. You have to be intentional. And when you're intentional, I find out sometimes I'm standing alone in the room. And Eric, or Commissioner Hood, he can talk to you a little bit about that, because I've had multiple conversations about this, and he has kind of been my guiding light or like supporter when I get myself into a corner when it comes to diversifying the police and now the fire. And just an example, this week we were going to put an offer out somehow, some way. The process, even though we're very intentional, it got kind of out of hand, and we were going to offer 5 Caucasian males jobs. But I stopped immediately. I went back and quickly reviewed the process. And out of 60 applicants, we had 16 what I would call women and minorities from the beginning. But in the end, we only had one
Mhm.
minority standing in the group of 12, which wasn't selected. I'm like, how does this happen? And they're getting close to the furnace. I'm feeling the heat, and I still missed it. So we have gone back now. We stopped the whole process and we're relooking at it. There again, complex issue, a lot of barriers, and we were able to fix it. But one thing that I heard someone say here, and I apologize, I can't remember who said it, was you can't find like a qualified candidate. And I do agree with that, because today, a lot of the minorities are different than they were 20, 30 years ago for opportunities. So now, a municipal job may not look as attractive to the college educated, or I'd say trained people in our profession, if we can't compete with other communities. So what do? We got intentional and we developed a program. And now with those firefighter positions, I'm offering a couple positions to fill because we need staffing right now. But then I'm going to go back and we're going to create a development program like we did in the police department. We're going to go to Muskegon Heights and Muskegon, and we're going to recruit people who are not qualified. That will be their qualifications. And then we will train them in firefighter 1 and 2. We'll train them in EMT to get them to our standard. It's going to cost our city more. It's going to take more time, but it's an intentional developmental program. It's the only way to do it, to reach into the community, because Muskegon Heights and the city of Muskegon, both those fire departments, for instance, and I'm bringing this up because I want to show the disadvantage people have. There's no way for them to get involved in the fire department like out in the townships where they have these volunteers, and then the dad gets their kids involved and they become volunteers, and then they get their firefighter 1 and 2, and after a little bit of time, 21, 22, 23, they have what it takes to be a firefighter. Then they apply to Muskegon Heights and us because we have the career departments, and they get the jobs. So
literally a father-son team in Muskegon Heights that are from Crockery Township.
right, we got
40-minute drive to work every day.
Same thing here. So now I'm like, I talked to Commissioner Hood yesterday, we're going to go into the fire because our fire department is not diverse, and we're going to create this development program. We've got to get up to minimum staffing first, and then we can start filling those positions as we go, as we develop our citizens to being firefighters and medical first responders. Because when I look out there in the bucket of people that are basically trained to come in, you don't see any minorities. And if you do, they're so highly sought after. The communities that basically have more money, they're more competitive, take them away from us. And we are a working city where some places don't really work as hard as us. I hate to say it, but they don't. So any person will go, I'm going to go to the best paying job with the best benefits, whatever, close by. And then sometimes we're left out. So that's back to those things, those barriers and excuses and reasons. So we've had to blaze through and create programs and become intentional. I've really been intentional in the police department, and it's been painful. You can talk to Dewan about that. It's been painful sometimes because people complain. Why are you doing this? We would always pick number one, or we'd always pick number two. Just so you know, number one and number two don't always fit. That tool doesn't fit in my toolbox. I've got a lot of ones and twos in there. I need other tools in my toolbox. And that's where the diverse fire department or diverse police force comes into this. And then like training, we talk about how important training is, but sometimes like I learned when I was a very young officer, I went to a diverse department. I learned about diversity and about having a diverse department by working in one. Once I went from an all-white community to Ypsilanti, and out of the 60 officers, we had just about 30 women and minorities. I learned quickly from them about a diverse department, right? So I'm working there. So I didn't have to go to training. Once you work with people, you start learning about your differences. You start learning about where they came from. They learned where I came from. I think that was pretty funny. And then like how we all interact together in a diverse community. So training has been important in the police department. It's now, with our new policy procedures and accreditation, it's a requirement. Before it was like what I would call elective or selective training. It's now a requirement. We've had a couple, 3 courses on diversity, inclusion, different things to help us become a more open-minded department. But still, let me tell you this, it never stops. We were going to do training in 2020 with an individual in the correction system. He's an African-American, and he has a specialty diversity training for law enforcement. Well, you know what happened in 2020. You can't be in a room big enough to do it. And I really wanted to have the training delivered like physically instead of like Zoom, so people would actually pay attention, competency based. You got to answer questions, you got to interact, those kind of things. It's coming in 2021. Got to be with us, and COVID goes away. But 2020 was an interruption in our training. So go
Let's
ahead.
carry that forward, that thought forward into our next steps and next questions. But before we do that, I just want to give another opportunity to the Vice Mayor, because he does have a very unique perspective as the president of our local NAACP, and having worked on these issues and steeped in these issues for a number of years. I just want to give Vice Mayor Hood an opportunity before he has to go, if he wants to weigh on what success might mean to him or to NAACP, and what he'd like to see progress on.
I think he stepped off. I'm not sure, but I don't see him.
Here.
Right underneath you, Jeff.
First of all, I like to say that before I go, is that I'm happy to see the progress that the city has made in trying to correct the wrongs that have perpetrated us for quite a while. I think the one of the biggest hurdles is to get everyone to understand social justice. As Chief Lewis has stated, trying to diversify the police department and fire department, he still runs into hurdles from other members of command, let's just say, or just from the process. So, and I think it's like that probably in every department.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, it is important to get a diverse staff in the whole citywide. And we got a long ways to go. DPW, yeah, I mean, and then, I hear talk of the training, and yes, it is hard to get to some of those trainings, especially DPW, what they do to get those license, police training. And once you get the certifications, a lot of times it's just like Chief Lewis said, you go into where the benefits and the pay is going to benefit you. We have people in our community that grew up and want to be police officers, and we're getting turned away. You get turned away, sometimes it's not, I guess what I really want to say too is that it's not, we're so far behind, and so we're trying to catch up. And our department heads are trying to shorten that field, shorten that distance between in employment. And it looks like you're saying, well, we're giving them a handout. Why are you trying so hard to get these people or to get minorities in these positions? Well, it's because they've been left out for so long. It's not that we can't pass tests. You can. Sometimes it's the way the test is worded. It's not that we can't get through our oral interviews, but sometimes when they see you, you failed already. You at the bottom of the list already. Sometimes you have employees just to get in the door it's now you don't have to put your race down, so that's a good thing. So basically that's all I gotta say. I could go on and on, but I'm not. I don't speak that good, so I'm not, and I gotta go. Hopefully I'll be back before the end of this, but I gotta get my eyes checked out, so I'm gonna take off now. And thank you, Commissioner Johnson.
Appreciate your insights. Thank you so much, Vice Mayor Hood.
Yeah.
I'd like to kind of piggyback on what Eric said and just say, it took a while for me to help some of the management or department heads, supervisors to understand that if you get an interview, it's already been determined that you are qualified for the job. Okay? So when you get to the interview, it's actually a matter of now it's who do you like the best? Well, if you're going to decide who you like the best, 99% of the time, you're going to choose the person that has experiences that you relate to. So you're going to pick the person that's like you. And if everybody on the interview panel is Caucasian male, then that's probably what they're going to pick. 99% of the time. You know what I'm saying? So they're going to pick who they relate to. And if you've not had any experiences with any other minority groups, then you're not going to relate to any other minority groups, and you're not going to pick them because you're not going to see them as the candidate that should be picked for that position. But so that's what people need to understand. And so it took a long time to get, I think people are starting to understand that more now. But I think until more recently, I said, I'm like, if your interview panel is all the same type of person, then that's what you're going to get. You're going to get everybody that's always all the same. I said, but if you mix up your interview panel, then you'll have different people, different perspectives at the table. And you'll make different choices based on that. But once people get to the interview, it's already been determined that they're qualified. Now it's who do you feel is going to be the best pick? Sometimes people will say, well, I just picked the best person. Well, the best person to you may be different than the best person to me. Or the best person to, or I've had people say to me, I want to pick the person that's going to be the best fit. And that person that you feel is going to be the best fit is going to be what's already in that department. You know what I'm saying? And if your department is 8 people, and you have all white males, then that's probably what you're going to pick, And so, but helping people to understand that sometimes, it just takes a lot of discussion, sometimes, but. I think
Great
there's something
points.
to
Great
understand.
points, Duana.
Ken, we
yeah.
really have not defined success in 3 years. Can we try to flesh that out?
Yeah, that's what I was
before
going to
get on
ask you
each
is
of
if
the table?
where we're at in terms of what you've got
We're good.
jotted
I
down for
think we're good at
success.
knowing what we want to do in the next year. What does success look like to us in 3 years?
Okay, and then I want to, I saw Michaela had her hand up, her virtual hand. And so I want to give her an opportunity to weigh in on this question of success, because we do need to kind of narrow it down or try to define success so we can then parlay that into our subsequent questions of how do we make progress towards that success. So Michaela, do you have some input on what defines or what success looks like?
Oh, I was just clapping.
Oh, you were clapping. Oh,
yeah, Dwanda
I didn't want to
was making
speak for
a
her.
great point.
All right.
gotcha. I gotcha. Okay. Do you want to weigh in on success or what defines success or what you'd like to see accomplished to be successful in say a 3-year time frame?
I'm gonna ponder that, and I will probably raise my hand in a few minutes.
Okay. Thank you. Does anyone else want to kind of more clearly define what we're trying to, our objectives, I guess, and what we're going to try to succeed in 3 years and what success looks like in 3 years? Jake.
Yeah, really quickly, because I want other people to talk too. So I think like we kind of talked about like raising awareness of like these key components in that first year. But over the next 3 years, I think there's internal and external stuff that we as the city need to do. Internally, I think we need to replicate some of the good work that Chief Lewis and Duana have already done, and kind of standardize that. And that's going to take a lot of work with like bargaining units, and it's going to take a lot of work with our personnel policies. But and finding creative ways and potentially spending some resources on trying to identify how to best cast the right net for a representative candidate pool for jobs. And then externally, I also think that we need to take action through the creation of a Citizens Commission on Economic Equity, which I'm kind of working on right now, and through that offer resources to the community to help them engage on issues of equity. So we need to kind of be a leader as far as outward external communication about the fact that you live in a diverse city. And what that means is that you should have a fundamental understanding of how your neighbors have been, maltreated over decades, and what are some potential solutions to that. So I think internally there needs to be like Chief Lewis and Dwana would be two good people to take the lead on that. And then externally, I think like utilizing different commissions and events to try to get people more involved from the citizen level in that kind of cause of social equity and social justice.
Jake, can you define that in 30 seconds of what a Citizens Commission on Economic Equity is?
Yeah, so I'm presenting in February, I hope, to the commission, basically asking permission for them to endorse a new citizens commission that would almost resemble closest, I would say, the planning commission. So prior to developments getting to city commission, planning commission has opportunity to look at them specifically from a planning and zoning standpoint. This commission would have the opportunity to review any economic development projects, whether they be housing developments, mixed use, or industrial, what have you, as well as city policies related to those, like tax incentives and stuff, and have the opportunity to give recommendations to the city commission prior to the city commission taking action on that stuff. So that's sort of a way for the city as an organization to promote both social justice and moving towards social equity by giving people a place at the table and providing input, support, and collaboration on the front end of our economic and social development. That was exactly 30 seconds.
I'll clap for that.
So I'm hoping to get stilts under that this before the end of this coming budget year, because I'm going to ask for some money. So I think that's going to be important to get that done in the next few months. And I already have a very, very good list of candidates. I want it to be either an 11 or a 13 member board, so it'll be quite large.
Okay, thank you. Michaela, you're back on with video. Does that mean you have some thoughts to share?
I do, yeah. I really like the idea of the equity board. I think that's cool. But I think generally, I would really like to see our downtown more representative of our neighborhoods. We don't necessarily have any businesses down there that are Black owned or Indigenous owned. And I think that we have a lot of businesses in Muskegon that could really benefit from having a storefront or having the opportunity to have a storefront or gain the resources to get there. So yeah, I don't know exactly how that would look, but I think that that would be really cool because I'm personally like less apt to go downtown because I feel like it's not necessarily representative of who lives here. And I don't feel really comfortable with that as a resident. So I'm hoping to see a little bit of shift in that.
Thank you. I see we got Arisha that has joined us. So we're right now talking about is how to define success with regard to social justice and social equity. And so we got a lot more questions still to answer. It's kind of unfair to try to cram or try to address this very important topic and flesh this all out in just an hour, just a little over an hour's time. But what's that, Chief?
One thing I really want to add, though, about our 3 year, because we're talking about that, correct? And this is one of the most
defining success in 3 years. Yeah.
Right. This is the most important thing I see all the time, and we never address it. Because I'm really disappointed in the community sometimes because on development. When I'm sitting in social justice, I see Michigan Works comes in, and there's a whole bunch of jobs. But then I look at our community, and our community did not prepare our citizens to take those jobs. Then I have police and fire openings, and I look at the community, and our schools and our community did not prepare anyone or even talk to them about these jobs. And no one here is really responsible for that, but I see it time and time again that people are 18, 19, 20, they are not prepared. So they've asked me, you go get them, you develop them, you train them. I'm like, did they talk about this when they were 10, 12, 14, 15, like that? We prepare them for sports. I'm telling you, there's kids that and sometimes we refunnel them into like our public safety because once they're done at college or they're whatever, they come into our job. But I'm really disappointed why the community will not step up and really work hard with the youth in preparing them. There's jobs here. I mean, you ask around, there are jobs here. Then I hear the person say, well, they don't know how to use a calculator. They can't use a yardstick. They can't read, they can't write. I'm going, what is this community doing to fix that, preparing? That's my, I'm off my
So
soapbox.
for you, for success in 3 years' times, we'd be seeing programs and initiatives that allow us, working in concert with our educational institutions as a city, creating the program initiatives that nurture and cultivate that talent, that homegrown talent here, to get our youth into our public school students, into the trades, into public safety,
Absolutely.
into DPW, and nurturing, cultivating that right here, so that our workforce can be more reflective of the community, because we are nurturing that talent and hiring from within the community itself.
There's
Am I
a
understanding
huge
that
gap.
correctly?
It would
Here's-
be interesting to see if there are any stats out there that show the difference in people in minority groups going into trades since they took the trades out of K-12. Because, back when I was in middle school, they had wood shop, they had all kinds of trades, little, trades that they taught you in school. And now you have to go to college, you know what I'm saying, and enroll, and now you have to pay for it to get the same trades that you might have been exposed to in middle school for free. And so it'd be interesting to see if there's any information out there on that as to whether, that was the big transition, because when you took the trades out of the schools, I've looked over the years at many of the, the entrance exams for some of the businesses in this area. And some of them, like, if you have an aerospace company, then they want you to know physics, or they want you to know a lot of different tools, that if they want you to know the difference between a tool that's used for cutting metal and one that's used for cutting wood, and all kinds of, they show you pictures in their test. And then if you can't identify those because you've never been exposed to them, then how are you going to get the job? It's like, it's part of that weeding out process that, gets the person where they're not even going to make it to the interview, and so because like Jeff said, they're not trained. They're not prepared to go into even just some of the entry level positions that we might have in the community that might be in a trade, but it might be an entry level position with a company that their entry level position starts at $16 an hour, and so, but they're not prepared because they haven't been exposed, because now they have to pay for it when, through an MCC or something like that, or the career tech center that they would go to will take them away for the whole day. Whereas before, when the trade was in your school, it was just like, I just went down the hall, and then I could make it to my next class the next hour. Now you have to spend a whole day away to do the trades, or half the day away to do the trades, as opposed to it being right there locally in your, in your school, and more convenient. So.
Okay.
Mr. Johnson, I just
Yes.
wanted, I wanted to help you stay on track. I'm
Yeah.
looking at the amount of questions, and you're right, we could spend all day doing this, but we have a lot of questions to go through, so.
Indeed, and we have 35 minutes left.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
So,
So
I don't think we've answered the part about how do you define success in 3 years' time. I don't know if, did we hear that answer, or what
we've heard some of it, but I just want to give an opportunity to Arisha to give input on what success means to her as we move on, and then kind of circle back to Dave, see if he's got a good understanding, or at least a jotting down of what synthesizing the input that he's been hearing about what does success mean. So Arisha, do you have any thoughts or input you want to share on what success, how to define success in 3 years time frame? Maybe she stepped away from.
Hey, Ken, while we're waiting, Michaela's got her hand up also.
Michaela, you have some additional input you want to share?
I think that was on accident.
Oh, okay.
I see those kind of
Thank
things.
you. So, I mean, for me, I would say just how do we, whether it's 1 year or 3 year time frame, to define success in advancing social justice and equity, it is to minimize disparities in our community across the board, whichever metric it is. If you're looking at income, if you're looking at housing, if you're looking at jobs, if you're looking at educational attainment, if you're looking at opportunities, like just in any realm that can be quantified and measured in our society, and we're looking at it at a local level, is are disparities being reduced? Are we making progress, or are we still seeing where women are earning less than men? Are we still seeing, particularly focusing on internally, because that's what we have the most control over, but also is our workforce being reflective? And we've talked about this, reflective of the awesome diversity of our community. Are we seeing disparities in educational attainment between, white folks in our community versus Black folks or brown folks? And same thing with income. So like, even though that we don't necessarily have control over that as a city, like us being mindful of that and trying to work to minimize that to the greatest extent possible, that would, as making progress on it, that would be success. And I don't necessarily think we're going to be able to eliminate those disparities in a 3 years time frame, because it took a lot of time to really ingrain those disparities. But for me, that's what I'd like to see in terms of success. But
I think that's
Let me, if I might
That's a good-
suggest from an economic development standpoint, the intentionality of developing Black businesses, I think, is something that we, not only as a city, but we as a community of Muskegon need to be about. And that needs to happen in that 3 year time, and that we actually have created those businesses within that scope, I think is what we would define success to me.
Hey, Ken, to assure success, why don't we do this? We have an educational promise in our county that citizens are benefiting from. But just because you get a higher education degree, such as a community college, doesn't mean you have a job. So why don't we do this? Have a job promise program. Then our employers would benefit, our citizens would surely benefit, and they could get prepared to get a job because they're promised a job, just like they're promised to be able to go to a community college or a university. That, I think, would really help, is preparing people early for a job. So we
That
have
is
a
exactly
job
what
promise.
Baker College, when I had my meeting with them, that they would like to see is that students are already promised a job. Once you graduate, you have this job. This job is yours. You don't have to go through the stress of, now I've got all this debt, blah, 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 blah. You have a position.
These are good.
Excellent.
These are good
That's
things.
what the MCEC program was kind of talking about too, is you go through the trades program in the schools, get credit, get an income, get the wraparound services, and then a pathway for apprenticeship and to a job. But Jake, did you have something quick to say? Because I want to get Arisha in on this and then move on to the next question.
I was just gonna say, we're kind of supposed to stay away from talking about like the how we're gonna get to success. We're supposed to only talk about what the definition
What that is.
are. And then also, we still haven't talked on this first one about who needs to be at the table, and so we need to probably have some.
I've been trying.
Same.
Who put Commissioner Johnson in charge of it?
That was Vice Mayor Hood.
Hey,
Actually, that was Dave. I blame Dave. There's a lot to unpack about this and discuss. I mean, that's what I'm saying. I mean, it's a real
We're
challenge.
down to 30 minutes though, so I want to just.
Yes. So Arisha, real quick, input on what does success mean to you with regard to social justice in a 3 year time frame?
Hello, everyone. Sorry, I'm late to the meeting. I would have to agree with Dave on really focusing on minority small businesses. I think there is a real energy there where we have a lot of entrepreneurs coming out in this time, in this last year. And I think the support needs to be there. I also heard someone speak about trades in the schools. And I think that was Dewana who mentioned having trades in the schools and not having them have to go to another building, which takes away from their time. So yeah, those are the two things that I thought of, and I would have to agree with what was said before.
All right. Thank you, Arisha, and welcome. Dave, oh, Beth, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, can I just pop in just really quickly? I don't want to interrupt the flow of things, but I'm just checking in to see how things are going.
Oh,
and check on progress with time. I
Perfect.
know this is
So,
like a big thing,
Should
right?
We've
Can I
got-
actually give that, Ken? Should I give an update of where we're at, or go ahead?
Oh, we are still on the very first,
No.
not the very first question, but the
Yes,
the
I want
first
to say I've been
third
trying.
of the questions or inquiries.
Yeah.
Yes,
hear
2/3
Ann
through the
saying, "I'm
time and
trying."
1/3 through the questions.
yes, we got to keep going.
Yes,
Please.
yes. So we're trying to
Yeah.
move on, but we've touched
Okay.
on some aspects of the subsequent questions while trying to answer the first questions, but it hasn't been a perfect sequence of
We
question and
still
answer.
don't have that definition either of this question, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, we've heard a lot of input on how to define it. I don't know if Dave feels comfortable with defining it, and if we all agree to the definition. But
Also, keep in
it's
mind
almost like
the
we should have done
last
this
question-
exercise before the meeting about what.
The last question talks about measuring progress, and I think we're kind of starting to conflate those two things. Like, we've talked about all of our impressions of what would define success, but some of the stuff we're talking about are actual measurables. So I think if we can move through the keep, stop, start question after we do the who needs to be at the table, we can probably dig into that a little more.
Yes.
Okay.
At
So-
the table, we need to get the at the table done here.
Yes.
Yep.
Real
So
quick.
it sounds like
Everyone chime
you
in at the table.
benefit-
What, Beth?
I'm sorry. So it sounds like you would benefit from the time all the way to 12:20.
Oh,
Or-
absolutely.
Oh, more, yeah.
We could use extra
Yeah, I
time
know.
if possible.
Okay. All right. Then carry on. I won't interrupt anymore, but thanks for letting me check in, and thanks for all the great work you're doing so far.
All right. Thank
See
you,
you
Beth.
soon. Bye.
So who needs to be at the table as we're achieving the success and striving for the success? Who all needs to be part of this and collaborating? Jake.
Really quick. So the easy answer is obviously marginalized populations, right? So anybody that is on the negative side of social inequities. So obviously ethnic minorities in Muskegon, especially African Americans, but also women, because women are also I hate the term victim, so I guess at the negative end of social inequity. But the more complicated answer is those that are gatekeepers or decision makers in the systems of power that perpetuate social inequity also need to be at that table, because you have to have buy-in from those folks to change those systems. So
Absolutely.
basically, folks that are current complicit in the current system, which I would argue includes all of us as city staff and elected officials.
Mhm.
Not maliciously complicit, but complicit because the system is broken.
Right.
So those are the two things. I think the folks that are marginalized have to have representation at that table, and the folks that are the historic gatekeepers need to be there as well.
Okay. Without duplicating what Jake mentioned, is there anyone that wants to that has additional input or additional people or entities that need to be at that table?
It has to come from the private sector because they're making the economic decisions. We are not. We're creating jobs within our own structure. What do we have? 200, 250 people working in our city, but it's those that are in the job creation sector that need to be at our table to get us linking with our citizens and our constituents.
Okay. Michaela, did I see your hand up?
No, but I would really emphasize the citizens who are living in Muskegon should be a huge part in that.
Okay. Thank you.
I would say our education people.
Okay. Our educators and educational
and-
institutions.
Yes, so whether it's, like the high schools, the public schools, as well as like MCC, Baker, Grand Valley, who are, all of our colleges that are, in the area also.
So important. So important. Any final thoughts on this from anybody before we move on about who needs to be at the table and giving support and collaborating? Nope. Okay. So what are the three things that we need to keep doing to make progress towards the various definitions of success that we've discussed?
Internally, I like the direction that we are taking right now with providing training and opening up the jobs more so that we can give training on the job or provide the education, or I think the chief is doing something like that too with policing and sending people off to school. So I definitely think that that needs to continue.
Should we be making, because from what I understand, not everyone that was, the training was made available to participated. Should we be making that mandatory? Or should we be incenting it? Or should we be, there be consequences for not participating? Like, how can we keep that going and ensure that it's universal or more
don't know.
universal?
I
don't
don't think
think-
we want to discuss the how. I think we just want to discuss what we want to do right now. So
Keep doing, but I'm wondering how we're gonna keep doing that, but better. That's what I'm wondering. But anyone else have any ideas for what we should keep doing?
We're looking at the whats.
I think we should keep promoting policies and suggesting programming from the city level to promote social equity and social justice. So this new commission that we're going to propose, the internal hiring practices and the changes to the human resources policies that have been pursued, we need to kind of keep going further down that road because there's more progress to be made. So I would say we need to, from an internal organizational value, we need to keep putting value on that equity piece.
Any other items on what to keep doing to make progress? Dave, you got something?
No, I'm just saying that's two other things that we've talked about up to this point that we want to continue going.
I would say keep doing what we're doing now. Keep having these conversations and making sure there's follow through, but we'll get to those measurements and metrics in subsequent questions, but keep engaging on this very important matter.
And I guess that goes to our first, what we want to do in the next year and making sure everyone is understanding what the definitions are and understanding the parameters of this area.
Okay. And what were you saying?
I was just saying, because we never really, I didn't feel like we really covered the, how do you define success in 1 year and 3 year? I didn't get that out of it, so.
I think Dave has it down, but we didn't get a full report on, because it's kind of, I don't want to say nebulous, but it's very broad and diffuse. Like, we don't have a perfect definition. I don't think. I didn't see a perfect definition.
I definitely see it.
Yeah.
I would
What
like to
three
point out
things-
that
I think we had the raising the awareness, you know, and then
That was year one.
understanding the definitions. I think
Yep.
that's a good goal for the first. Yeah, I think Jake's trying to say something, but he's muted.
Oh yeah, so I was actually just saying something to my wife, so I'm good.
Oh, okay.
I just wanted to say, so I think that our economic development team has been doing a really good job too of helping minorities, especially when somebody reaches out or they hear of somebody. I know that there was a restaurant that closed and they were trying to find that restaurant vendor another location in the downtown area, and I know that they really went to great lengths to try to do that. And I think that those kind of efforts need to continue.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. And what three things do we need to stop doing in order to achieve success? Jake, your hand was up first. Very enthusiastic.
I've done a lot of talking. I'm gonna let Jeff go
Okay,
first.
Chief.
Just real quick, and this goes back to the things we want to do, is we have got to address like civil service because that document is one of the big barriers that I deal with all the time. This written thing, how you got to do things. We got to stop. I know we can't today, but we've got to work on tuning that up so it doesn't stop us from doing stuff. I continually get that put in my face, what's in the civil service document, because that is affecting us how we go through our promotional process, how we hire people, and so on and so forth. So I think that needs to be, we stop doing that and we retool it. You know what I mean?
We've
I know
taken
that's
that to the public 10 times.
I know.
I think it's actually been 13 times, I think.
Has it
That
13?
it's gone to a vote to be nullified or shuttered, and the public says no. but we
Ties
brought
back-
tweaks to it. We brought
Yeah.
tweaks to the civil service
Yeah.
to the public,
Yeah.
and they've said yes. So
Yeah.
tweaking and improving it, but jettisoning it, I don't think the public's comfortable jettisoning it because they see value in it and protecting against, nepotism or, other
I don't think
unfavorable
the
things.
Community trust totally revamping it, but I think you're right. As long as we take one piece at a time, explain why it is, I think they're more comfortable doing that, and I think we need to continue doing that.
You
Or
can
What,
tweak, you can tweak it.
yeah,
Focus
what
on
are some other
tweaks
things
on-
that they need to stop doing? Dave, how many do you got?
One.
One. Okay, that's what I thought. I didn't know. Trying to
Well,
move
At
like
least
fast
got-
here.
At least got 3 on keep. I mean, we're keeping the training jobs and the slots that we're looking at in both police and DPW. We're promoting policies, continuing to address equity internally here in our departments. And we are continuing, especially in the next year, the conversations and the engagement so we understand the definition of what we're trying to achieve with social justice. Civil service barriers is something we need to stop. We need to keep any other things we need to stop.
Yeah.
Okay. What
So
else? Jake?
one of them was the civil service situation. Another one would be maybe refining our human resources relationship with Muskegon County, and that is not an indictment of them because they do a good job. But there's been several anecdotal examples of where especially in public works, but other places too, where we've had to repeatedly post positions because they keep such a stringent definition of minimum qualifications. I'll give an anecdotal example. Who's a minority hire in public works, who applied and reached out to me in my capacity as an employee with the city, like, hey, I'm applying for this job. And I had to basically tell them, you need to make sure that you can fill out something on your resume that touches every single provision of this posting. Otherwise, you're going to get rejected out of hand. And so fortunately for this person, they could tie all those things at least tangentially to their previous work experience, and they still got rejected. And this is something that the city had been trying to fill for half a year. And so it put us in an awkward position where in a department head meeting, staff members had to basically call the county out in a department head meeting and say, what's going on here? This is an example of what we suspected was already happening. So I think refining that human resources relationship to have a bigger focus on being open-minded to getting people through the door from at least to that oral exam point will have a big ancillary impact on helping with issues of inequity in our hiring practices. So civil service. Go ahead.
I have worked with some of, when people are filling out or updating their job descriptions to work on, how they make the parameters for education and things like that, and helping them to understand that if you put an associate degree down, then you're more likely than not going to get somebody from MCC, because and the people and so in their definition, if the person has 2 years of education, but they didn't get an associate degree, they're not qualified. So maybe they went to a 4-year institution, they've got 3 years of college, but because they didn't have an associate degree, and that's what the job description asked for, they didn't qualify for the position. And so getting people to make those little changes on their job descriptions so that they're not leaving people out, that, you can still accept the associate degree, but you also want to accept maybe the person that has 3 years or 3 years experience also. And so just so that they're not leaving people out that way, as we've had a lot of that. And I'm like, well, where are you going to get the associate degree except from the community college, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it narrows your pool of people to just community college people when you put the associate degree.
So has that already been incorporated into our hiring process?
We have been working job description by job description as update them, but not into the hiring process.
Okay,
But
that's one of our three. That's one of our
job
three
description that comes up. If it has that down, then I do talk to the department or division head about that. To make that change.
So, sorry, I'm not trying to cut anyone off or be curt, but I'm trying to keep this moving quickly. So that's one of our three. Do we have our three now?
We've got civil service barriers. We have the human resources relationship with the county needs to be in its current form, sort of needs to be stopped. We're talking about things being stopped. We're not throwing them
Want us
out.
dovetailing with that, or would want to use
I
yours as a
do not hear
separate?
a third one out there. Someone want to
Okay.
articulate that?
I definitely
Anyone got
have
a third
one.
one?
Okay.
I think a third thing that we really need to stop doing is we need to stop in public meetings and public discussions, having both staff members, but also elected officials speaking on issues of social equity with their own personal definitions and biases surrounding social equity. So social equity and social justice are easily and statistically well-defined issues. And sometimes we see people applying those things for, on the elected official side, political reasons, on both sides of the issue. And then from the staff member side, as you know, a buzzword to move things forward through commission or through committees. And you know, so my point is, like, both appointed and elected officials are guilty of it. I'm not going to name check anybody, but it always gets really frustrating.
You're
as
spot
somebody-
on though. Across the
like
board, you're
somebody-
spot on. We need to stop using these as buzzwords, and yes, you're spot on.
So I think like we need to stop informally discussing these things and define these issues and standardize our organization's discussion of them.
Wholeheartedly agree.
All right,
That's our three. Let's move.
All right.
start.
So what do we need to start doing? 3 things we need to start doing.
Well, do we, like, Jake, going back to your point, that definition of equity, is that just something that we, not just something, but is that something that we define and have, like, right on our agenda, right at the beginning? So this is well understood between everybody, and this is not something we have to keep defining over and over and over again, or what your definition is versus this person's definition, and it's just like part of the standard.
So it's so, like, you know, some people take shelter in the fact that this is an uncomfortable conversation, right? And they can be taking shelter on the status quo side, but they can also be taking shelter in their use of these terms inappropriately to advance an agenda. And so I think one of the things we need to start doing, and I hope to maybe tackle this through this equity commission that I'm kind of working on a concept for, is we need to start you know, uniformly training our staff and elected officials on the definitions of these concepts. And that way, you know, elected officials are going to have to start checking each other when these terms are being misused, because it's really not appropriate to expect staff to do that for them. And then I think our staff, we're going to have to hold each other accountable. So I would just say, like, start using these terms and crafting policies responsibly around these terms is one of the things I think that needs to start. I don't know if that answers your question, Ann. I was trying.
Yep.
Great points. Great points. You got that, Dave?
Got that one.
All right. What other things do we need to start doing to work towards and achieving the success?
I would say an aggressive program of minority business development that is broad, that goes into a number of different areas of endeavor that will create, at the end of the day, as we get to number 4, specific businesses that are given the opportunity to be successful within our city.
Okay. Okay. More concerted support, whether that's services or resources to business development in the minority community and communities.
And Ken, to round out his number 2 suggestion is that job promise program, because along with creating minority businesses, we have got to promise our citizens jobs. And it doesn't mean after they go to college. It could be out of high school, it could be in high school, it could be after college, but a job promise program.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I think that's a good third one right there.
What's that, Ann? I'm sorry.
I think that's a good third option right there, what the chief just said.
Okay.
I think we need that.
All right. So let's being funky now, but progress and accountability. How are we going to measure progress?
There's a ton of data out there that can contribute to that. So, you know, we've talked about over the next 3 years, like trying to do more community outreach and like in the first year, getting people to understand these concepts. I think there's tons of like KPIs you could use as far as like, okay, what were the outcomes of these efforts by the city? not only number of people attending, but also getting like stakeholder feedback post trainings, post events, post, publication. So I think measuring our progress through how many people in the community we're reaching, and then also trying to determine like, okay, how many minds have we changed? Because there's these deep-seated biases around these issues. Like, well, certain ethnic minorities don't achieve the same educational attainment as the white majority because, and then name your bias. You know what I mean? So the more people we can kind of walk through and kind of handhold through the issue, as an organization, the more minds we're going to change and the more positive change makers are out there. So I think just kind of being data driven as to how many people we reach and how many people we impact with any kind of programming we put together is going to be important in the near term.
Yeah, it's really important to have those KPIs, that baseline metrics of where we are today, so that we can measure against it a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, to demonstrate that we are progressing. And if we're not progressing, then retooling and adjusting our approach, pivoting.
And then like brass tacks as well, like, how many Black businesses did we empower to move into the downtown space, as Michaela mentioned, or how many women-owned businesses have we moved into our key commercial corridors, commercial corridors that exist in our majority minority neighborhoods right now, like Getty, East Apple, Laketon, Wood Street to an extent. They're all underserved as compared with Lakeside and downtown. So, how much staff time is being invested into those corridors as opposed to our two that we've been focusing on? What kind of programming are we putting together, and is it being equitably distributed resource-wise? Those are all things that we need to start measuring. And that's, honestly, our department is kind of hoping to use this commission to funnel some resources into those kind of efforts. So kind of a 2 birds, 1 stone thing.
Wonderful. What other things do we need to start doing?
Hey, Commissioner, one thing
I'm sorry, I jumped back to start. What other measurements? How are we going to show progress? What's that, Chief Lewis? I'm sorry.
No, we're on measurement, so I'm gonna stand mute just for. I have a final comment, but I'm gonna stand mute right now.
Okay. What how are we going to measure our progress? How are we going to hold ourselves accountable and be able to demonstrate that progress? So certainly, Jake's talked about identifying staff's resources and attention to supporting minority development and neighborhoods across our city that maybe don't get as much attention or TLC as say downtown or Lakeside. But anything else that comes to mind in terms of how we can better measure, I guess looking at disparities, and trying to, even though we can't control that, we can help influence that, disparities in income and health access and opportunities and things like that, come up with KPIs for that. I don't think we can flesh out all the KPIs right now, but I think that's important that we are looking at what are the key performance indicators. And getting that on paper and start getting that data to measure. Any other things people want to throw out there or bring up in terms of measurement to hold ourselves accountable? Because for me, I think that is most important. We've had conversation after conversation after conversation about equity and social justice. But if you don't have measurement, and you don't have that data, and we're not tracking our progress with these metrics, then it feels like we're just spinning wheels. We're just talking to feel good and not actually making progress. And I'm over that. So over that.
Well, what kinds of things would you want to see measurement for, in terms of moving the community forward? What kinds of numbers is it important that you have? Maybe Jake can talk to a little bit of this, or Jeff even, if you're like applying for grants for things, what kind of numbers do you see that they're looking for in terms of equity? I mean, is it internal numbers or is it external numbers in terms of your community? For planning, it might be, there might be a business that we would like to come to this community that won't come because, we have enough minorities here, but we don't hire enough of them, and so the numbers to them might look like, well, they don't have what we need there in terms of applicant pool, so we're not coming there, so.
So I would say it's both internal and external. We have more control or influence over the internals. But that's what we most need to get a grasp on, but also looking at the externals, because how are what we doing as a city and internally influencing and contributing to the externals, even though we know we're not solely moving that needle on the externals, but how are we, along with all the other forces and powers that be and in society, are moving those external, so that we're at least mindful of those externalities, as well as we're trying to most influence and redirect internals.
You know, Commissioner, once I think we pick a discipline, such as, let's say, jobs in our minority community, the information is basically out there. When you go over and talk to Michigan Works, they can tell you how many jobs are in the area, and they can tell you like how much unemployment there is, like let's say in the city of Mesquite. I mean, that stuff's there, but you got to pick your discipline first and then get your result-driven data as you go along. Like you put together a program and you start measuring it. That's what we do in the police department. You know, we go, okay, how many crimes do we have and what's our solvability rate, blah, blah, and then we think that's going to impact the community. So once we've picked, I guess, our topic, then we work on reducing it or increasing it, whatever, and we look at the data to support if we were successful or not. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
In everything we do, there is a result-driven factor that's got to be plugged into it to measure on everything.
Yeah, and I think that what Jake's talking about with the Equity Commission, that Citizen Equity Commission, I think that's a great platform or great way to flesh out those KPIs and what are we looking at internally and externally and focuses energy there. So I think could be a great launching point to really define those KPIs. Any other inputs on measurements from folks?
Really quickly, I just want to say, Dawana kind of mentioned what kind of numbers do we want to see. I think, and then she mentioned the difference between kind of holding people accountable externally versus us trying to push policy internally. I want to speak just a little bit on some of my failures in that area, both in my current role and my previous role. What I've noticed is when we try to, create policies that touch external and partners, like industrial businesses is a great example. Right now we do our EEO report, and those of them that receive tax incentives are supposed to, commit to effectively, I'm going to butcher the language, but they're supposed to commit to attempting to hire a representative disposition of our population. Some of them probably hit it. Most of them probably don't. Dawana's the one who's the keeper of those numbers. So without digging into the weeds on that, but what we tried to do when we rehabbed the tax incentive policies this last year, was effectively grant additional years of tax incentive to those who would commit to, installing minority management or hitting, levels of minority hiring. And, legally we were kiboshed on that. So, there are, you got to play the game on the field you have. And so that was something that was really discouraging at first, but what it kind of led me to believe, and has led me down the rabbit hole of this commission that we want to get legs under, is we kind of have to drive policy forward for the things that we can control. And so, where we spend our staff time and where we spend our resources through grants and other funding or other, knowledge-based resources is where we're going to kind of get those minority communities ahead. And eventually create an environment where it's to the benefit of those, it is right now, but where they see that it's to the benefit for those private sector entities to make an effort in that hiring practice. So I think that's very important to recognize, is that our hands are tied right now. Just because something is morally and ethically right does not mean that it's legally possible right now.
We have to get creative, yeah. Sometimes, yeah.
I want to say the importance of what Jake just said there. Earlier in the conversation, we said something like we should make training mandatory, or we should make minority businesses being spread out mandatory. Jake just said the magic word, incentivizing things. When you incentivize things, to be surprised how many people come along with it if you incentivize it. That's all I want to say. Instead of mandatory, incentivize, and you'll see the difference.
Yeah, that was the question earlier. Do we make it mandatory? Do we incentivize, or do we penalize? And that's something that we need to flesh out real quick, because we only got 45 seconds. Dawana, what did you want to add?
It'll have to wait till another meeting.
Oh, okay. Any final closing thoughts? We're being moved out into the main session in 31 seconds. Any final thoughts?
Just the EEO numbers. I mean, I can make sure that we have those updated, as you guys need those. But in terms of our departments, and so that we have a good sense of where we are and what we have internally.
Okay.
But yeah.
All right, Michaela, 10 seconds. Did you want to add something?
Yeah. I think that a lot of accountability, though this is way not internal because I'm a citizen, I think a lot of
All right, welcome back, everybody. Good to see you. I hope you had generative conversations. And as part of this report out, I would like to start with Sarah. And I believe you all had youth and education because I know you've got a 1 o'clock meeting to get to. So
We
why don't you
do.
kick us off?
So we had youth and education, and we kind of really just spent a lot of the time just kind of loosely talking about our thoughts and ideas when it came to youth and education. But I'll start with the questions that Beth had proposed for us. In terms of what success would look like when it comes to this topic, one of the main themes that we all kept reiterating was we need to get opportunities out in front of our youth and make connections. And we need all of them to have equal access to those opportunities. One of the things we talked about was it might be a good idea to compile a list of what connections are out there that exist and look at how we can grow those connections with the youth in order to provide more opportunities for them. Some of the things that we want to keep doing, and I feel like I'm going to reiterate a lot of the same themes over and over, but we need to keep identifying the connections that already exist and growing those connections. We think that there's connections that are out there that would benefit from being strengthened rather than trying to create whole new connections that maybe don't already exist. And we also think we need to keep working on gaining parental involvement with that youth. You know, a lot of us identified as parents, and the fact that it can be exhausting when you have children to try to help those children foster those connections. And so what do we need to do to support the parents so that they can support those kids? One of the things we identified that we need to stop doing is we need to stop being exclusive. We need to value all input from all stakeholders and make sure that we're listening to all of it equally. A few of the things that we need to start doing, maybe strengthening some of the current connections that we have that aren't very strong. We know they exist, but they could use fostering so that we can get those opportunities and connections out there for those youth, particularly like school age youth. And then as far as measuring progress, we all kind of looked at each other and said, this is a difficult one. You know, one of the possibilities that we talked about is like positive school data, but we felt like you can't just look at Muskegon Public or just the school systems. We have to look at all of it. And so we think that measuring the progress, part of that is going to be identifying those relationships and connections with the youth, and look at, have they been strengthened? Have they increased? Have we increased our opportunities for our youth? And the accountability piece, we just said that we have to make an overall commitment to making progress towards the goal of strengthened relationships and connections. And we need to constantly reevaluate where we stand with those. We can't just assume that it's happening. We know that we're more accountable when we have to continually evaluate it and, like Dan said, make reports every month on where do we stand with it. So I feel like I just kind of spit that all out at once, but that was kind of where we went.
Great, thank you. I heard a lot of great things in there, including that you are looking to strengthen and build on what exists, because that serves as the foundation. And I'd encourage you all, as you continue to work with the goals that you're establishing today, or that, you know, these priorities as you're fleshing them out, to, as much as you can and as appropriate, put qualifiers on strengthen or increase or expand. We didn't have enough time for that today, but I just wanted to add that in there. because that's part of the progress and accountability piece. And how will you know that progress is happening? Any quick comments or questions for the youth education group from anyone else?
This is Leanne. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I guess I'm grateful to hear what they said, because I feel like that matches up pretty well with what I read in the stakeholder notes with the groups that were connected to youth. So good job on alignment.
Nice. Yeah, ideally, we're going to hear that alignment and some of that overlap. Great. Anybody else with comments or questions for the youth education piece? Okay. Thank you, Sarah and team. And who would like to go next? We had social justice and affordable housing.
I'll go.
Thanks, Dave.
We've got social justice. I've got probably about 7 pages of notes here. It was a wide-ranging conversation, a lot in terms of the first 2, in terms of how we're defining success here in the next year and the next 3 years. I think the fact that we didn't come down with cemented in answers to these shows the challenge, I guess, that we are going to be facing in terms of this area. The one thing that I think that we did sort of hone in on in the first years is that we need to come to a common understanding of what the definitions are, and Anne shared, some of us had seen in some of our internal training on social justice issues, the difference between what's equal and what's equitable. And we need to have that conversation internally and then in the community here in the next year, so that we have a staff, a group of elected officials, and eventually, hopefully, a community and community leadership within our city that are all speaking from the same or similar understandings of what this means. As it relates to looking at defining success in the next 3 years, we did get into the weeds a bit on 2 departments, DPW and police and fire, public safety. And that was the internal, in terms of our ability to hire a workforce that represents and looks like our citizenry and our diverse community and our diverse city. And I guess the word that came up with there was intentionality, in terms of we need to be intentional in bringing to the fore the policies and procedures that we need to get to where we want to be, which is to have that workforce and our community makeup be sort of one and the same as it relates to who's in our city and who's in our workforce. The concept of training positions, and that whole concept, I think, bleeds over into the educational realm. Was discussed in terms of needing to have our city digging into our community, bringing in candidates and 2 specific areas, public safety and DPW, having them be trained internally and presented for the job. And I guess those are underway within those departments, and hopefully will be something that will define our success here in that 3-year time frame. Who should be at the table as we do that? Obviously, the marginalized populations across the demographics of race, of gender, of economics need to be at our table in terms of how we are going forward. And then the gatekeepers, and all of us here who are staff or our elected officials are those gatekeepers, and we need to be committed to being at the table as we discuss these, what can be very difficult conversations on social justice and equity. The private sector also needs to be involved in it. Our businesses, our community decision leaders in terms of the institutions, and the educators, those that are able to give the input, as we did very well in terms of the citizen input portion of this goal setting session. And then finally, the citizens of our community, of our city, across all geographics and all demographics, need to be intentionally brought to the table to further these issues. Keep, stop, and start. I'll just run through a couple of things that were said. We want to keep those job training slots that we are working with. We want to keep promoting the policies to addressing these equities. Obviously, a lot has been done in the cannabis area in terms of that policy. There is one example. And we need to continue to keep the conversations and engagement on these. Things that we may want to stop, as we chuckled, and I think I wrote about probably a good half of them. The civil service barriers that seem to be frustrating some feel of our progress, that maybe we don't do away with that, but there needs to be continued tweaks so that those barriers are removed and stopped. That there may be also barriers that need to be stopped within our human resources relationship with the services contract with Muskegon County, and that we need to stop using buzzwords both as staff and as electeds in terms of this area, so that we all get on a common platform as it relates to the definitions of what we're talking about in this realm. It's things that we need to start in terms of we have a program in this community right now of promised education. We need to start to explore and start going with a promise of a job. And that's sort of a different mindset going forward in the years to come. We need to have programs and starting to assist minority small business development and continuation of the minority small businesses that are already in our community, in our city. And we need to start using, as we said before, and to stop the uniformed use of the terms and definitions around this topic. How do we assess our progress? It's got to be data driven. And we need to, if it means that we need to have more, which we all agree, downtown businesses from the minority community, especially the African American Black community. How do we count those, and not only in downtown and Lakeside, but then how do we develop those in other neighborhoods as it relates to other commercial areas within the city. We need to be tracking these data both internally and externally, but that as we were being pulled out of our room, we were discussing the legal hand tying that we have sometimes in wanting to get to where we want to go. And this is a city we're unable to get there through the means that we may find the easiest because of legalities, and that we need to be working on incentives to get to the outcomes that we want in the coming years. So it was, we could have probably gone on for another hour and a half. And there's just a lot thrown out on the table. And I want to thank those in my room for having a very open discussion.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dave. And thank you to the team that was talking about that. And Yeah, this is, while we hope to have made substantial progress to identifying those goals, the conversation will continue. So thank you for getting it off to such a great start. Affordable housing. I believe that was Leanne, your group.
Yes. So we talked about housing more generally, excuse me, not just with regard to affordability. So in starting out, our definition of success in 1 year, knowing what we know about current developments, we said 75 to 100 homes built within the city, incorporating missing middle housing, working family housing, and larger apartment developments, providing a range of price levels so that we can achieve a balance of affordable and market-driven options. Increased property values on the east side of the city and within the urban core. A development plan for Preble School, and an increase in the number of houses that are being rehabilitated, not just new houses. And then our definition for success in 3 years was to, excuse me, increase infill housing and broaden that focus to Jackson Hill, Nims, Campbellfield, McLaughlin, and Angel neighborhoods, because there has been a lot of focus already in Nelson. Urban residential zoning approved for all of those neighborhoods. Again, a range of price levels with this development so that we are still achieving that balance of affordable and market-driven options, incorporating the missing middle housing. Again, just, you know, keeping that consistent growth, allowing all of those options. In 3 years, we're hoping that we have an actual construction project at Preble School, that the watermark is completely built out, and an even greater increase in the number of houses being rehabilitated in our neighborhoods. And we talked about how we measure that progress, and we think that we made some fairly specific goals so that the measurements are fairly obvious. And then we also added the number of building permits that we see each year and reduction of blight in the neighborhoods. In our discussion on what we keep doing, stop doing, and start doing, we want to continue to educate on urban residential zoning. We want to continue working with developers to ease the process for developing and for constructing. We want to continue the city's programs for housing rehab, continue the scattered site brownfield and modify that as the home values increase. Continue our home buyers assistance program through community neighborhood services. Continue working with Community and Compass on developing affordable housing, and continue blight fight efforts to stabilize our neighborhoods. The only thing we mentioned to stop doing was to stop allowing exclusionary zoning. Some things that we want to start, expanding the urban residential zoning, showcase the success in the Nelson neighborhood with regard to that urban zoning, increasing funding for CDBG and home funded programs so that we can increase our impact on the city for those that need help, and developing marketing materials for the Preble property.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Leanne.
You're welcome.
So I'm going to have to combine because I realized I forgot to check in to see if there were any questions or comments for the social justice team. And so let's say, any questions for social justice and or affordable housing before we move on towards the closing?
I have a question, Beth.
Yeah, please.
Let me, if I can get back to my screen here. One of the conversations that Dave and I had when we met with the young Black professionals, and I don't know if that was mentioned in the social justice group, but they talked about the relationships with our police department. And nationally, we've seen outrage from people in Black communities who have had real brutal outcomes when it comes to engagement with officers. But one of the things that they really stressed is seeing more Black officers on our police department. For some reason, they feel that attracting Black officers that live in the community has been a problem. I think there needs to be a focus on building better relationships with officers in the community. They also stated that having them more officers living in the community will probably be a way to build better relationships. But that was one of the concerns under that social justice initiative that really stood out when they talked about the safety, the relationships with police officers in the community.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner German. Wondering if anyone has any follow-up to that, or either that comment or anything else to add. Okay. Who needs to just kind of go, get our blood pumping again? Well, I think we're almost ready to wrap up here. And so thank you so much for the conversations that you had. It sounds like it yielded a lot of good discussion. And I remember one of the groups said we have almost more questions than we have answers. And hopefully that's part of what this process brought up. Was it's not just about who needs to be at the table, but what information needs to be at the table that maybe you don't have now. And so asking the right questions is just as important as having those answers. So with that, any other questions before we start to close, or any other comments about those conversations?
Just one other question.
Yeah, please.
And this would be for Ms. Leanne. When you talked about in your group the increase of funding for the CDBG funding, initially, what was that conversation like? Just a thought from me in previous meetings with the commission was taking the timetable off of how soon it could be when they want to reapply due to certain services and needs that families may have due to fixing up, just say, their homes, needing a roof or siding on their homes or something like that. Have that been considered? Has that been considered?
That didn't come up in our conversation today. What I can tell you is that it's certainly a goal of mine, and something that I have spoken with the division heads about, finding a way to use some of the city's general fund to start matching a portion of the dollars that we get from HUD for those programs, so that we can increase the funding level and just have a larger number of homes that can be impacted, so that, you know, more families are getting help related to rehabilitation on their homes.
Okay, because and what I get is the feedback from some of the citizens that do receive the funds, but they have to wait, you know, what is it, 5 years before they can reapply again for CDBG funds. And if it's a possibility that that timetable can be lessened, where maybe apply again in 2 years, that would be beneficial to a lot of people in the community that have older homes, because the problems seem to occur more because of the age of the homes and stuff like that.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying there. The need is very great, and oftentimes when people come to us because they need assistance, they need more than one thing addressed, and we are able to address one thing at a time. So yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, Commissioner German. And thanks, Leanne. Okay, if there aren't any other thoughts, questions, comments, I'm going to pass the baton to Mayor Steve here for just a moment. He looked a little surprised. But if you would mind commenting for just a moment about like, what are our next steps? What happens? Where do we go from here?
Where we go from here is our brain trust. Well, no, our great facilitators and our administration and division department heads, I believe will begin pulling together all the ideas and data from today so that we can begin formulating a clear path going forward as to what we'll be focusing on and how with what we've generated. Once upon a time, we used to go around with the little sticky notes, and
The old days.
in the old days, and what we want to do, and our big old sheets of paper. But we'll begin collating all the information from today, and then convene in some form in order to coalesce all this and come up with the game plan for moving forward.
Great. Great. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, you'll get all that opportunity to put the how onto all of this what. So Leanne or Frank, I just want to check in with both of you. Any other anything you want to add before we close?
Hold on, let me turn my video back on here. No, nothing really for me. It was a great exercise. It was definitely different, because we weren't involved in some of the conversations, which is also a kind of a fun, different way to do it too. But it was nice to see what other people kind of, came up with, working on their own and stuff over there. So I think it was a good exercise, and I'm happy to see us at least done with today's exercise on time.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. On time is always good, and even early. Yeah, and to your point, even if you were in a particular room, you probably heard something from another report that is of interest. And so it's not meant to silo you into specific areas, but to at least get the conversation going and then see where you can intersect. Leanne, I think you were going to say something.
I'm very grateful for all the participation today, and especially for the participation in the stakeholder meetings. As everybody is thinking about the goals, I also want you to think about the process, and I'd really appreciate some feedback on how you thought this went, having these stakeholder meetings and doing the survey, and if you've got ideas for how to improve that or build upon it, or whatever your ideas are for the next time we go through one of these. I appreciate them.
And I want to add my appreciation and gratitude to all of you for your active participation and being here and giving this time and so much energy. And just in general, as a citizen of downtown Muskegon, how grateful I am that you all are in charge and for your vision and your energy and your enthusiasm and optimism. It makes a huge difference. And I'm proud to be a Muskegonite. And super proud to be part of these kinds of conversations. So thank you so much. So let's close. We're going to do another one word around where you're going to pass the baton. This time it's one word about Muskegon 2031. So 10 years into the future, what's the word that you want to capture Muskegon with? And Michael is channeling something here. So whoever would like to start and just pass the baton, and I'm going to try to capture it in the chat as we go.
Hey, Beth, I can start out.
Thanks, Ken.
After.
Oh, wait,
today,
it wasn't Ken. Who's
Chief.
talking? Oh, thank you. I'm sorry. I looked over here. I saw Ken do this.
I answered to a lot of names. But after today, I think the word I came up with is action. we need action. A lot of talk, a lot of ideas stuff, and now I'm stuck on action.
Thanks. Who would you like to pass to?
I'm going to pass to Jay Paulson to get public safety out of the way.
I would say, wow, just one simple.
Oh, I love it. Awesome. And who do you
I'm
want to
gonna
pass to?
pass to, let's do Dave Baker.
And Dave, remember you're muted.
Did not remember that. I would say success. And pass to Doug.
My word would be engaging. And I would pass to Onita.
Thank you. I see diversity. And I'm going to pass to Dave Baker.
I already went, so Leo?
Say accountability. And I will pass to my ward commissioner, Miss Teresa Emery.
Oh, I will say live-in destination. And I will pass to Commissioner Dan.
Sure, I'll say prosperity for all, and I will pass it to Commissioner German.
And remember you're muted, Commissioner.
I would say opportunity.
Thank you. And who to? I'll pick Jake.
Equitable. And I will pass to my commissioner, because I saw him not paying attention.
I'm always listening. If I had kids, I'd be a beautiful and terrible parent. I'm going to say intentionality. I think that intentionality is a verb that we could use to add to all of these things that you guys are saying that would augment and make it specific and real and relevant for the people that live here. And I'm going to choose, I don't know who's when, Jim. Yeah.
The word I'd use is expansive.
Thank you. And who passed to, Jim?
Who hasn't gone yet?
The mayor.
Mayor, pass on to you.
Okay. By that time in our history, hopefully beforehand, just home in the best sense of the word, home, where we feel safe, welcome, and loved. And I'll pass off to, who hasn't gone yet?
I'll go.
Sarah.
My word would be filled rather than infill, filled. All filled. So I'll pass it off to Frank.
Oh, I don't have one word. I'd like to say, I knew it. Just because I'm so optimistic about this city. And then I'm going to pass it on, I think, to Sarah, right? Were you raising your hand, Sarah? Oh, you were already unmuted.
Then I muted myself. I would say bright.
You said bright?
Yes. And I will pass it to Anne. I believe she hasn't gone yet.
I would say complex. Dwana, have you gone?
I would say, I'm going to piggyback on Jake and say equitable.
And Dwana, who do you want to pass to? Who hasn't gone? Raise your hand. Leanne, Dave, Alexander, and
Oh, I'll
Eric.
pass it to Dave Alexander.
Okay.
I'm going with Commissioner Dan, prosperous. And Leanne?
My word is welcoming. And I'll go with Ken Johnson.
Thank you. I like Frank's phrase. I knew it. I think it's very optimistic and one we all can embrace. I have two words though. One for today, and that is grateful. And the word for 2031, Muskegon, it's abundance.
Nice. Thank you. And I believe Commissioner Hood or Vice Mayor Hood. My apologies.
Good to go towards the beginning because all the words get taken up.
Well, there's more. You can +1, +10, any of them, right?
I'm gonna go with the ones that was in my mind anyhow,
Good.
which was diverse home destination. And anyone else?
Yeah, has anyone not had a chance to go?
Joe?
I think we got it. All right. I'm hitting enter. Take in those words. Lots of positive energy there and lots to be excited about. So I can't wait to be here in 2031 and see all of this coming to fruition. And Deborah, one of our neighbors, just chimed in. She said just as in justice. So thank you for adding that, Deborah. So with that, we're adjourned unless there's anything else that anyone wants to say in closing.
Just a great big thanks to you, Beth, to my fellow commissioners and staff for all the hard work. And let's not be afraid that as we're talking about people coming to the table, if we have to build a whole new damn table and redefine what that means to make sure people, all own that table, then let's do it.
Yeah. And on that positive note, we're adjourned. Enjoy the rest of your day and enjoy the sunshine. Thanks
Thank
everybody
you.
for being here.